Hello and welcome to another episode of Media Musings. Um, Blanket disclaimer: none of us are Jewish.
No. And personal disclaimer, I was raised Roman Catholic. Um, what I know about Judaism was filtered through a very Catholic lens. I do have Jewish friends as an adult. That's not me excusing anything I'm going to say. I'm just saying I've learned bits and pieces from them. And I've picked things up from social media. Obviously, I'm a classicist, so I know a little bit of Jewish history.
Yeah.
I'm cringing saying that because I know how little I know, but I know a little bit. So yeah, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert. I would say you'd be pushing it to say I know what I'm talking about when it comes to
Yeah.
Judaism. I went to my friend once and I said, we were talking about the Jewish holidays, and my friend said, I said, "What's this one for?" And she said, "They tried to kill us. They didn't, so we eat." And that's pretty much all I know. I don't even remember which holiday it was. It was just sometime in September.
It, it,
I
no,
don't know
like,
much.
knowing Jewish history, it's most of them.
That's most of them. I was just like, "Isn't that most of them though?" And she was like, "Yep."
Yeah.
There is, one of my friends did once design a spreadsheet where it had the list of the holidays on the left and it said, they tried to kill us, they failed, we eat. And it had an X in for each holiday if these things applied. Um, which was very useful, but I've gone and lost it.
Yeah.
Um, so now I just, whenever I see that there's a holiday and they're celebrating, I'm just like, greetings for your holiday, please insert adequate one here. And
Yeah.
leave it at that. And they know I mean well, but they also know I'm garbage at Jewish history and stuff. Because I've just never had the time
And
to study it in any depth.
and all I know was filtered through a very Pentecostal, very evangelical education.
A Zionist education.
Yeah.
Let's put that out there now.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, content warning.
yes, content
This,
warning. We're discussing the shower.
yeah. This film takes place during. Well, a good portion of this film takes place during the Holocaust.
And all of it takes place at Auschwitz. In some form or another.
Yeah.
So there's
Final
your
check,
warning.
guys.
Yep.
Check.
Check, yep. You're good,
Okay,
scummer.
cool. Great. I'm going to mute now whilst I'm not talking because there's background noise here.
Yeah, we're just doing the standard disclaimers of none of us are Jewish, none of us really know enough about Judaism to be considered anyone you should be listening to about Judaism.
Yeah. So
Obviously, I'm assuming you've done the content warning that if this is a subject you're not comfortable with because of the nature of
Yeah.
this movie,
we're going
we
through that
understand.
now.
Yeah. I should say, I said last week we did the general chit chat, and I realised last week, oh, it's Holocaust Memorial Day. And I was like, too late to change the topic, so I thought we'll do a belated one. Ring agreed. Ergo, we are here.
Yes.
That's how that went down, folks. So, and the reason I recommended this film, because we were thinking, what should we do? Should we do like, should we talk about Mouse or other things? The reason I chose this one is, first of all, it centres the narratives of actual Jewish people.
Yeah.
And second of all, it focuses in and it becomes a microcosm, and it does the exact opposite of what the entire propaganda machine around the Holocaust was designed to do, which I'm sure we'll get into. It humanises the people in the barracks and it gives them voices and lives.
Yeah.
And it even if you're not Jewish, even if you have no knowledge of this subject whatsoever, this is one film I absolutely would recommend to watch, because
Yeah.
this is the film for me as a kid. I'd heard about the Holocaust. I've got family who were adjacently impacted by it. My dad's family are Polish, Catholic but Polish. My great aunt was taken into domestic service to a Nazi. My great uncle flew with the Polish Air Force against the Nazis. So it's a really it's a family story to me, but it was all very abstract to me. And then I saw this film when I was about 13, and I think it says a lot that 15 years later, literally 15 years later, I still remember the majority of this film, and this film really stayed with me.
Yeah.
And there's comments that get passed in this film that I know I've said to other people when discussing this in academic contexts of, talking about Jewish practices, talking about how it was all designed, the way it was set up, why the German people got on board with it. This film goes into a lot of depth, but it does require you to pay attention. It is not... I think for those based in the UK, it's very important you know that this first aired on BBC Two. Not BBC One, not at prime time. This aired at like 10:30 at night or something daft. 11 o'clock at night this aired. So it was not prime time.
I wanted to make that point actually, that this isn't one of those big budget movies like Schindler's List or whatever that deals with this subject. This was
no, this is a single scene
drama.
film. But what I'm getting at is it's BBC Two, it's 11 o'clock at night. This film requires you to think. This film presents something to you, and every part of this film is designed to fill in spaces in your knowledge already and make you think. Ring says at the end of every stream, the point of a storyteller is to give you questions to think on. I think this film really embodies that. This is the kind of film you could write academic articles on. You could really use this film as a jumping off point to educate on any aspect of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, and I think of Jewish practice and Jewish belief and Jewish history. And there are ways into all different things, but this is not... First of all, it's not a kid's film.
No.
It's not a kid's film. It's terrifying. It is a psychological thriller. I will put that out there. It is a mindfuck. It really is. It's probably one of the scariest films I think I've ever seen. But that's because of the psychological aspect of it. And I watch a fair few horror films. You all know I'm in the Hannibal fandom. I've seen Silence of the Lambs. The traditional horror films you watch as a teenager. Seen them all, been there.
Yeah.
This is by far, I think, the most frightening film I've ever seen, and part of it is because it's based in that realistic setting of things that happened.
And Noodle, I'm just going to say to you that that's an interesting thing you've just said, because I actually think sometimes the most effective, should we say, I don't even necessarily want to say horror, but things that just hit hard with us are not necessarily big budget type of things that are meant to scare us, but because they're depicted on something that either did happen or really could happen.
Yeah, and they're a psychological thriller. That's a different genre to horror.
And my generation, it was again another movie that was shown on the BBC called Freds, which was depicted what would happen if nuclear war actually took place.
It's very much in that tradition of BBC, almost docudramas, but they have that element of slightly heightened reality that takes them into the genre of psychological thriller. This film, I will say as well, there is controversy about this film. this film was supposedly based on a true story.
Yeah.
But there are several different versions of this story. There's versions of it happening at Auschwitz. There's versions of it happening during the pogroms in the 1800s and 1900s. Sorry. There's versions of it. And the thing is about this film, the setting almost doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it speaks to a truth about the nature of Judaism and the Jewish people and the Jewish faith. And I think that film, especially given Jewish history of how much they have been throughout their history, you can take this basic plot and put it at any low point of Jewish history. You know, the point right before it becomes a feast day and they eat. You know, it's kind of... It's really important that we don't get hung up on historical accuracy about the Holocaust, because that is not the point of this film.
Can I expand on that a little as well? Yes, I had heard this even before today, and I will say I only watched this movie for the first time today. I had heard this story. I'd heard various versions of this story that Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz decided to put God on trial, and I heard various different things of what. There's one version where they acquitted God. There's another version where they found God guilty, and we know that this was obviously turned into a play by a guy who was a survivor of Auschwitz, but he did not set it. But he did not actually set his play during the Second World War. He set his play in the 17th century Poland, I think, where there was where there was pogroms. It was either Poland or Russia, but somewhere
probably
where there was regular
post-plague. Although if you're in the 1700s, Poland might be Russia, because there's times when Poland didn't exist on the map. So, it might be Russia, it might be Germany, that kind of area.
May have been modern day Poland, but technically Russia then or whatever. But I think we before we went live, we actually talked about this. Whether this thing happened or not, I don't necessarily. And like I said, this may be an apocryphal story. It may have really happened, but I don't think it necessarily really matters that much in this, because the conversation, the things that are brought forth in this movie, in this story, are just very, really tapping in. It really hit you in deep philosophical questions that hit you in it, but they've done in such a way that it really hits you hard. And I think before we went live, I talked about we talked about this movie very much delves into the philosophical problem of evil, whether you want to look at the logical, referential.
But I think as well what's important, because you've touched on it, you said there's different versions of this where they find God guilty, they find him, they acquit him, or and again, this movie, and I'm sure when we get to the end we can talk about it in a bit more depth, I don't think the outcome of the trial matters either. This movie is a rare movie where the actual plot of the movie is not what matters. What matters is the journey.
Yeah.
And the conversations that happen and the discussions that go on.
Yeah.
And the philosophical debates that happen, and again, for me, the point of this movie is to show the humanity of people at a time when all of their humanity has been stripped from them.
Yeah. Can I just make a point here?
And I think that is a story that spans cultures. And they even make the point in the film again, which we'll get to, about, at some point, nearly every culture has faced annihilation. And out of every culture that's faced that, come these stories of hope, these stories of humanity, stories of human decency, and these stories of people grappling with their faith. And we've all done it. We've all had, you two are atheists, I'm polytheist, we've all had a dark night of the soul at some point.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, let's be
This,
honest.
and
The
this
one
was
thing we all have in common is having had a dark night of the soul.
yeah.
And for this is almost a microcosm. If you take the Jewish people as a whole, which I suggest you don't because there are rules against that now, but if you take that as embodying a single personhood, then this is the dark night of the soul for that personhood. And it is that grappling, and it is... There's a quote, I think it's Lincoln. When I had nowhere else to go, I went to my knees in prayer.
Yeah.
It's kind of that happening and being shown that, and it's the belly of the whale, dark night of the soul. It's all of that. It's very much, okay, but God's on trial. Has God abandoned us? And if God's abandoned us, what then?
Yeah.
Because this is actually is a point that I wanted to make. Like I said, I watched this movie for the first time this morning, and became, shall I say, consciously aware of my biases during this discussion, and that as an atheist or whatever, I'm wanting God to be found guilty. And there's a little moment that hit me this morning. It was like, oh, there's a little bit of the angry atheist still left in me, and I became a little bit self-aware of that.
Oh yeah, no.
and
I had a very similar. I watched this movie.
Yeah.
This movie came at the right time for me because I lost my Catholic faith when I was between 11 and 13. I can't say it happened in a flash of light. There was a single instance.
Yeah.
There were, this movie was one of the many straws that broke the camel's back for me.
Yeah.
There are other things to do with the Pope and other stuff, but this is one of the many straws.
But I think...
And I was angry, and I was still struggling. And to see this film really... this film both pushed me forward on my path out of Catholicism, but also made me stop and think about the path I was on.
Well, I guess...
And that's a hell of a powerful thing for a 13-year-old.
I guess what was powerful for me today was having watched this the first time as a man in his early 40s, and especially someone who in the past year has actually been calling out bad arguments that my own side has been making, which seems to be I got a little bit of a reflection in the mirror, and it sort of dawned on me that why am I cheering for one side or the other in this? And then getting that reflection to see with certain things which made me sort of realise, well, actually, why a belief in God or a something that's part of a cultural identity, even how important that can be to a people.
Yeah,
and this is what was so powerful about this.
This as well. This is what I was getting at with. We've all done it. I'm sure as a Christian ring, and I'm not entirely sure what denomination you started out as, Scummer. I'm gonna guess Church of England unless I'm mistaken.
I've never been. Okay, I'll just very briefly. I've never been baptized or anything like. I've never been officially brought up in religiously at all. But I did obviously go to Church of England schools, and when I joined the Scouts or whatever, I had to do Church of England parades, all that sort of thing. So that C of E probably would have been my main.
Yeah, so you're culturally C of E. Okay, and I Catholic. We were all, I'm sure, taught or picked up the idea that we had this personal contract with God.
Yeah.
That for our faith and for our following, we would get something out of that, be that salvation, be that a good life. You know, in Catholicism, you're taught if something's going wrong, it's because you've not prayed hard enough. Or
Yeah.
because you don't want it enough, or because God knows better and it's not what's best for you.
Or,
It's the same arguments we debunk on the regular on Twitter.
yeah,
But
or
those are the arguments we're given. And we're taught that, you know, my school song when I was at secondary school, it went, the Lord is my rock, my stronghold and my fortress. And I sang that song at least once a week, every week, for 5 years. I had to. Even when I no longer believed, I had to sing it. Because it was sung at school assemblies. And I still remember most of it by heart. And I can still hear the tune in my head, like it's there. And I never really interrogated the words. They were just, they were like another prayer. In the same way I never questioned the meaning of the Our Father or the Hail Mary. I just I recited these things and I was taught this is what they were meant, so I accepted it. And then when it turned out this wasn't what they meant, and I wasn't getting what I thought these things would give me, I had that breakaway. I had very poor teachers. My teachers, the answer was always, oh, it's God's will and you shouldn't question, which is very, very much a difference I see with my Jewish friends. It's almost a religious requirement that they question their faith.
yeah.
Whereas in Catholicism, it was a big no-no. You did not question the priest. You did not question the RE teacher. You accepted it, even if it made no logical sense, because God said so.
I think that's a running theme within, I don't want to say every denomination of Christianity, but the vast majority of this is, you just got to have faith. Whatever happens, you just have to have faith. And I think what this film is, I think this can speak to. This doesn't just speak to people who are Jewish. I think this could speak to people who have any kind of belief, whatever. You understand that being in a situation like this is going to test anybody's faith. That there is if you're a believer that there's omnipotent, omnipresent, benevolent deity, being in something like being a prisoner at Auschwitz, I think would test the most devoted believer. And I think this is what this. And again, I don't want to keep getting back to this, but the whole problem of evil, which I think is I always feel is the central, to me, was the central theme and takeaway from this and the debate around this. And I guess I can only imagine being in that situation. I hope I'm never in that situation, none of us are, because let's be honest,
we wouldn't survive.
Let's be honest, this is something that must never happen again.
Yeah, no, and I will say, I grew up knowing from a young age. I remember being primary school age, and they gave us a list of all the reasons Nazis killed people.
Yeah.
I was in primary school, I remember this. And the teacher basically had them on an overhead projector on the board. That's showing my age. No, it was an overhead projector where they wrote on the piece of film. And the teacher went around the room and made us all say the number of reasons the Nazis had to kill us. And that was in primary school, which So I have grappled with these questions. I read Anne Frank at 8 years old. I've had to. Growing up Polish, you grapple with these questions. You learn from a young age. You would not have been safe. I'm not white. I'm not. And as I got older, that number, that's a thing from school that sticks in my head. Because as I got older, that number is added on. I learned that I have learning difficulties, differences, disabilities, whatever you want to call them. I'm dyslexic. That would have put me on a list. My dad's Polish. My mum's black, Jamaican. I'm mixed race. I married someone outside of my race. And knowing that is very much why you hear me talk a lot about being radically anti-censorship. Radically this, radically that. Because I know that if we give fascism a foothold, I will be one of the first to go. And I will be... And so I've had to, from a young age, grapple with the idea that if someone knocks on your door and puts a gun to your head and says, disown your spouse, disown your parents, say you are not this, that, or the other, and I am not judging anyone who did that in that genuine circumstance, because no one can truly know what they would do in that moment. But we were taught to question that and to think on it and to sit with that question of, would you disown your faith? Would you disown your family? Would you join the other side? Would you take one of their uniforms? Or would you tell them to pull the trigger?
And I'm going to say this
and
film...
that's a hell of a question.
And I want to actually say this film, I feel, deals with this in a very interesting way with the capo. Now, for those who don't know, capos during the in concentration camps were generally, essentially, you could say collaborators or whatever, who were basically people, the guards, that they volunteered to keep the other inmates in line, kind of thing. So they were, you could view them as collaborators, but. And I think there was definitely, I can definitely see the attitude where a lot of Jewish or people, or just any victims of the Holocaust, would just see the capos as absolute traitors. But I feel like this actually, even though the character in this, who is a capo, it comes across as a bit nasty, you understand his reasoning and his desire to survive. And it's like, his desire to survive. And can we honestly look at us? And this is the whole thing. Can we honestly look at ourselves in the mirror and say, if faced with that same circumstances,
would you do it?
Would we do it? And I can't answer that. And I can't answer that question. I don't know.
I can, but I've grappled with it for 20 years.
Yeah.
And what I've come away with is that it would depend a lot on on the exact situation. We can all say we'd jump in front of a bus to grab a child out of the road, because that's just human instinct. We'd do that. We can all say we'd run into a burning building to save an old person, or to and to an extent, most people can honestly say that and believe that about themselves. But it's that thing of, it's not just the one chance you have at survival. If it means collaborating, do you do it, knowing full well that if you don't, you're dead anyway? What are you willing to do to survive? And is that something different to what you're willing to do to protect other people? Because I will hold my hands up. There are certain things I would just say, you know what, pull the trigger. Don't go there. I've had that I've sat with that thought for a long time, and I said, listen, there are certain things that you will not make me do. And then and then they say, and it's the traditional. It's almost a philosophical trolley problem in a way. Someone
Yeah.
puts a gun to your head and says, "Do this," and you'll say, "Pull the trigger." Someone puts a gun to your spouse's head, your child's head, even a stranger's head, and says, "Do it." Are you still telling them to pull the trigger? Because that's essentially the debate that's going on here with the capo. He's saying, don't kill me, kill them.
Yeah.
And can we all honestly say that we wouldn't do that, even if it was total strangers?
And my honest answer to that would be, I can't say I wouldn't do that until I'm confronted with that situation.
It's not a
I
situation you
don't.
want to be in, is it?
Yeah, and it's not a situation any of us want to be in. And I think in a certain way, I suppose it humanized what it did brilliantly. I think it was humanize these people who made that decision, because
Yeah. And I think
even though the character in it, he's yeah,
he's a
he comes
nasty
across
piece
as a
of
bit of
work.
he's a
He comes
nasty
across as
piece
a
of work.
nasty piece of work.
But he's
Yeah.
made, but he's very honest about his motives. I just want to survive. If that means helping these, I said, and the way he says, you all could have done the same thing. You could have volunteered or whatever. You may have survived a bit longer. It's that, but basically he's like his
That
whole
did
thing
come across with a
is
tone
he,
of doth protest too much.
Yeah.
yeah,
Like he
it
knows what
did,
he's doing
it
is
did.
morally and
I
ethically
think there's
dubious.
a there's a there's a there's a thing where I feel like, yeah, he does know on some level what he's doing is wrong, but it, he's justified it to himself in this way that
Again,
my instinct is to survive,
not to
and
bring down the tone or anything, but I think this is the 4th week on the trot where I've made reference to that one line from that one Pirates of the Caribbean film. It's not
Yeah.
about living forever, it's about living with yourself forever. And
Yeah.
I know there are certain things I couldn't live with myself, ergo I would say pull the trigger. I also know there are a lot of things I could live with. And does that make me a bad person that I know I could live with if someone said your spouse or a stranger, pick? I could live with
well,
that
yeah,
decision because that's a
and I'm
stranger and that's my spouse.
gonna say,
But
obviously,
that doesn't mean it wouldn't haunt me.
but it's one of those
Yeah.
things that in retrospect, because I think decisions like that are made in the moment, and I think I'll use another piece of literature that somewhat delves in on this topic. And God, I can't believe I'm citing a Frederick Forsyth book on a media musings thing here. But
Yeah.
if any of you've ever read the Odessa File, a big part of the early part of this book is a diary from a Jewish inmate from the Riga camp at Riga, and and he goes through the whole thing of the decision he made to become a capo, and a lot of it in a way was his justification to himself, at least, is he wanted to survive and to the end of the war to get to this point where maybe he could tell his story about what had happened. So that was his own internal justification. But when being a Jewish guy or whatever, like when he after the war, he had the chance to go to Israel or whatever, because it was the whole dream, wasn't it? Was to go to Israel, and he internalized himself as, I'm not worthy. What I did during that period, but he said, even though he justified it to himself at the time, he, in retrospect, years later, realized I can't really live with what I'd done. And like I said,
Exactly.
he wouldn't go to Israel, because he couldn't move to Israel because it's like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to be among my people.
And there are a lot of deep philosophical questions here, but I think what we've done, we've spent the first half hour talking around it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably best we just talk through the film in order.
Yeah.
Because if we
probably.
keep on like this, we'll go on for 4 hours and we won't actually
Yeah.
talk about the film.
With
First thing I want to talk about, there's a really...
with one final, if you want a dissection of this film from a Jewish perspective, you're in the wrong place.
This ain't it. Yeah, this ain't it. This is not from the Jewish perspective. This is just from the perspective of people who've lived through a very minor version of the Dark Night of the Soul being presented, and therefore have an opinion on some of the philosophical debates herein, and also have sympathy for the fact that there was a Holocaust and these people went through hell and back.
Yeah, and I think I'll just say this. I think I speak for everyone on this point as well. If there is anyone who watches this who is Jewish and thinks we've got anything particularly wrong, please hit us up and please comment. Let us know.
Let us know.
Because if we get shit wrong, we want to be corrected on it.
Yeah. Even if we're not asking you for your emotional labour. All we're saying is just tell us we're wrong, and that's all you have to tell us. Just tell us we're wrong and how. We will do the rest of the research if you don't want to go into it.
Yeah.
But by all means, please tell us that we're wrong, because otherwise we're not going to know. So we have this opening scene of the tour bus arriving at the gates.
Yeah.
And there's a line that is almost darkly ironic. Where she says, "Oh, there's a charge to go in."
Yeah.
And it's, especially knowing what this film's about, that line is so darkly ironic.
And that irony is only heightened by the fact that it then cuts to a flashback of arrival.
Yeah, of an arrival where they were being brought in their hundreds and thousands.
Yeah.
And this film is told... I think it blurs the line between flashback and dramatization.
Yeah.
Because the old man who's telling the story, it doesn't ever specify whether he was there or whether he's just heard the story.
Yeah.
Because there's even a bit where the tour guide says, yes, many people hear that story and have heard that story.
Yeah.
But the juxtaposition of what Auschwitz is now, which is a tourist destination, almost a place of pilgrimage.
Yeah. Sadly
and
for both sides, unfortunately,
that,
but
for both sides, yeah, a place of pilgrimage, a place of mourning, a place of remembrance, but also a place of learning and of tourism. And there are some stories that I think a few years back there was a story of a person taking a selfie in one of the gas chambers or something.
Yeah.
And it made big news and people were horrified, and they were saying, a kid's obsessed with their phones, is this selfie culture? And we were all moralising about it and all the rest of it. But hang on, they've already paid to go in there. It's already been commercialised to high heaven and back. Where is the line?
Yeah.
And we like to think we're on the right side of that line. But I think that's this great juxtaposition of this film of the commercialisation of the memory of it and the great depth of the sorrow and the horrors that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll take a little brief tangent here because maybe next year around the Holocaust Memorial we could cover the film Denial, but there's a scene in that movie of people visiting one guy visiting this thing, visiting Auschwitz and the chambers, and sort of saying that he's sort of saying, well, he's trying to say, where is the proof that they did this thing? And the Jewish lady is like, damn it, this is a place where you show respect. But we'll get into it whenever we decide to cover denial. But the whole thing is,
Yeah,
she didn't realise that what it was he was looking at this as a crime scene.
yeah.
And again, that could be another thing for
The
that.
thing is,
Whenever if we do
without
denial, which I
Switch,
think we you'll
you have to
understand.
understand with the Holocaust and without Switch, if you look at it from a purely forensic point of view, there is not a lot of evidence. Because most of it was destroyed. Most of it went up in the ovens. That's why at the Nuremberg trials, it was said, there is no requirement for hard evidence. We will take hearsay and oral testimony as factual evidence. Because that was all that was left.
Yeah.
And to an extent, that feeds into this mentality with bearing witness that we see in this film. And the requirement that someone has to survive to bear witness. And if you survive, it is your duty to do so. And it is your duty to bear witness to this trial and to what's going on around it.
Yeah.
So it is a really... I don't deny for a second it happened. I don't deny for a second that it was horrendous and that there were millions. Personally, I think 6 million is a conservative estimate just of Jewish deaths.
Can I just point
6
out,
million is the generally accepted number, but that number, first of all, only includes Jews. Doesn't include every other type of prisoner. And second of all, is conservative.
And I just want to point out, because I brought this element into the conversation, I feel like I am not a denialist. I want to make that point very, very clear. None of us are.
We're not denialists, and as I just said, I think
I took a tangent about another movie that deals with that particular aspect.
Yeah, and I think with films like this, there are kind of three that every filmmaker has a decision to make when they make a film about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Do you make a film about the atrocity? Do you make a film about the aftermath? Or do you make a film about the propaganda? This film, I think, is first and foremost a film about the propaganda and the atrocity. It sits at that intersection. And it's very cleverly done by sitting at that intersection. It is not, they talk a lot about what's going to happen afterwards. And the start of the film is the aftermath. And the end of the film is the aftermath.
Yeah.
But that's not the focus. And this film is very clever in where it sits at that intersection. And there are other historical events. So, for example, there's something called the Katyn Massacre that happened in the Second World War. And filmmakers who try and make a film about that, no, you either have to make a film about the propaganda or about the event itself. You can't do both. And there are various films that take it in different ways. But that's a totally different conversation for another film for another time. But that's kind of... Spielberg makes films about Schindler, and that's a film about surviving it and the atrocity itself. And the propaganda, it sits at that element of the propaganda and shows the other side of it as well. And a lot of films, Schindler's obviously the famous one, but there's a lot of other films. To an extent, if we ever got a film version, I think there has been one of Anne Frank's diary. that would first and foremost have to be a film about the atrocity itself, not about the propaganda, because that's not Anne Frank's story. Films about the Nuremberg trials are quite clearly about the atrocity and the propaganda. So it's almost a Venn diagram, pick two.
Yeah.
Of those three
Yeah.
headings. And this film is very cleverly almost in the very centre of that Venn diagram.
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah,
it centres Jewish voices in a very Jewish way. And it centres the voices of the prisoners in a very unique way. So whether it really happened or not is pretty much irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like
whether the events of the movie happened, whether the trial actually took place or not is irrelevant because the Holocaust happened.
Yeah. And the pogroms happened.
Absolutely.
And the destruction of the temple happened. And, all of these other things happened.
And this is the thing, if you watch so you will go through, essentially you will go through a very brief history of things that have happened to the Jewish people over the centuries.
Yeah, and I think there is a point as well to say that the Torah I like is the fact that is a historical document.
Yeah.
The Torah is a historical document. It's a record. It's not a Bible in the sense of how we think of it in Christian cultures. The Torah was first and foremost a historical record of things that had happened.
Yes.
It was written to keep track and to keep the story alive, not necessarily
just
to give
gonna make a quick clarification. We're talking about if the trial, if the prisoners putting God on trial actually happened. That's irrelevant. That's because irrelevant. The Holocaust happened.
And I think the point, because the Holocaust happened, the point of the trial is irrelevant. It's what the trial represents.
Yeah.
And again, I'll say, Krabby, if you actually read the Wikipedia page about this movie, that there is that debate that goes on there that the filmmaker thought that the story was apocryphal, but the actual author of this story did later maintain that this is something that actually happened. But it really, and the reason I say it doesn't matter, it's more about in that kind of situation.
As with other stories, as with most folk tales, did Robin Hood happen? Does it matter, or is it a symbol of the lower classes grouping together and looking after each other? Does it matter if King Arthur really existed? Does it matter to an extent if Jesus really existed as a person? Does it matter, or is it the stories around it and what they say about humanity that matters?
Yeah,
and
because I think the main thing here is the story. The main thing with this film is the story, is the debate on this of.
This film's a philosophical debate. It's not a historical documentary.
And I'm going to say, I don't even feel that it's a debate on the existence of God. It's a debate on the nature of God.
I will say it's not, though. It very pointedly says multiple times this is not about the mind of God, the nature of God. This is not about
the covenant.
This is about the covenant, and they're very strict about it.
Yeah.
And there is a point, and I know I'm probably jumping ahead.
I think please just let me say this. I think that you've done exactly what they do in the film, and exactly what everyone does when they stop to think on this question. You've done what the characters in the film did, is you've looked at it and you said, you cannot possibly debate this without understanding the nature of God. But you can. In very legalistic terms, you can, and that's what they did. Now, if we started talking about the nature of God and the nature of good versus evil, that wouldn't stand up in court.
Yeah.
And this is, first and foremost, a court trial.
Yeah.
But those questions get brought up by it. And again, it gives you something to think on. Doesn't necessarily answer those questions for you.
I may be jumping ahead with this a little here, but there is a line in this movie about where and again I'll be paraphrasing this because I can't remember the exact quote, but it was the whole idea is, well, did God not give us the law? Therefore, we should try him under the law.
Yeah. Basically, God is not above the law is the entire thing. The question of whether God exists is never questioned in this film.
Yeah.
That is generally the Jewish God exists as they recognise. They do go off on a tangent where they kind of half discuss it, but then they pull it back.
And
because the point is not whether God exists. The point is God exists under Jewish law. Therefore, under Jewish law, is God guilty?
Yeah. The point of this movie, the point of the trial in this movie, is, to put it in a very legalistic sense. Again, it's not about the existence of God. It is not necessarily about whether God is good or evil. It is the legalistic sense of this trial is that God made this contract with the Jewish people, and the trial is on whether he has honoured his contract or he has broken his. He stands accused of breaking his contract. Put it in the covenant. That is what God stands accused of in this.
There is a comment in the chat that I think is really important.
Yeah.
Where Hermit has said they're talking about someone, that one. They're talking in the chat about a couple they knew who were survivors, who said they were racially Jews and it didn't matter because God had nothing to do with any of it. And that is the point of this film. It's trying to establish whether God had a hand in it or not.
Sandy, I'll just say
the point of this film.
Yeah, Sandy, I'll just say that point you just made is addressed in detail at a certain point in this movie as well.
I would say that is the point of this film.
Yeah. So, anyways, the tour group, arrives at Auschwitz,
and you've got grandfather. You get the impression, although it's never said, it's grandfather and granddaughter travelling together. Because he's very old, she's like late teens at the most. The tour guide is a young woman, quite obviously Polish accent going on, but speaking English because this is an English-speaking film.
Yeah.
There's a group of about 15, 20 of them walking round. Not even that, I'd say maybe a dozen.
Yeah.
And they're being shown Auschwitz as a tour. They're being... The film does occasionally cut back to the tour going on, and you hear the tour guide say things that it's almost irritating. I don't know about anyone else. I found it irritating.
About how
she was so vapid about it. She just very basic statements of fact of, oh, we're going into the gas chambers now, or this is where they cut the hair, and it's like,
and she's obviously like she's dodging around the uncomfortable truths of what happened there.
And she'll say things, and she'll say, this is the gas chambers where, well, no, you're a tour guide, you're supposed to be telling them. But there is that assumption that if you go to Auschwitz, you already know.
This is a tour guide who's very much going through the motions here.
I don't think she is. I think it's more... She grasps the gravity of the situation, and she understands that as a tour guide on minimum wage, charging people 5 zloty each to go in, it's not her place to teach them. Especially given the fact that her audience are mostly older people. If you look, the people on tour are mostly older people. Most of those people in that audience are older than she is. And there's at least one guy who's old enough to have been there. So
it's like, what can she teach them? Yeah.
Exactly. But it's her job to teach them. and she annoys me because I've met some great tour guides, I've met some bad ones. She falls in the bad ones category because tour guides are supposed to be very unflinching when they show you the history. That's what they're there for.
I think, yeah, tour
But
guides.
she has the proper level of respect, but that respect almost silences her. And there is a danger, and again, this is something that's discussed more in denial of, can you have too much respect for a topic? Can a topic be too sacred to discuss? As a historian, I will always say no to that. Nothing should be so sacred you can't question it, assess it, present it, understand it, talk about it. And you have to do that, and that's why this film's so powerful as well, because it doesn't flinch away from the truths.
Yeah.
And it's that contrast between what we see on the film and the tour guide who's sugarcoating it almost. It's like, you're at Auschwitz. We know. You don't have to sugarcoat it. Give us the cold hard truth. That's what you're there for. And she fails in that. But it's very telling that she's there, and as a character, she causes this discussion because you think, I should never go somewhere, even classicist, I should never go on a tour to any historical place and know more than the tour guide. If I do, there's something wrong with that. Because the tour guide makes their living being there, and it's their job to educate people about it. And I have got into full-on conversations with tour guides about the history of places. The good ones are the ones who can keep up with me.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to go to the Ark Encounter in Noodle, but anyway. But no, that has happened to me before. I've known maybe a little more about the place itself than the tour guide. I should point this out. My stepfather volunteers as a tour guide, and he's had to learn, and he's really had to learn a lot of history in a short amount of time to answer questions. He just so you know, he works just one day a week. He only volunteers on the exhibit at the Mary Rose in Portsmouth, and we'll give tours. And he said he's had to learn an awful lot in a very short amount of time. But I'll give him his due. He's very knowledgeable. He's like...
Yeah, no, but I'm a great believer. The best tour guide is the person who's forgotten more than you know before you arrive.
Yeah.
That's the best tour guide.
It's like, probably the most strict examination or strict conditions to be a tour guide in the world are the Tower of London. The yeoman warders, the beefeaters. Generally, because they are pretty much all ex-military, generally from lower ranks of military, and there is they got to pass an exam before they get a job. They've got to pass a very rigorous exam before they get their job as a yeoman warder in the tower.
Yeah, no, to be an officially licensed tour guide in Rome, you've got to prove you can speak 3 languages, including you've got to pass an exam in Italian on the history of it to get your license to be a licensed tour guide in Rome. And if you're not licensed, you can't take your tours into a lot of places. There are unlicensed tour guides out there, obviously, but there's to pass the actual licenses, it's very strict. And that's the point. You want a licensed tour guide anywhere you go because they're the ones who are going to know. Unless you happen to know someone who lives in the area, knows the history, and has a PhD in it, they're not going to know more than a tour guide should.
Yeah.
But this was she was very... I know a lot of people who, when they talk about terrible things that happen, they go quiet. It's the same instinct when you talk to someone who's grieving and all you can say is, I'm sorry, and give platitudes. I don't do that. I don't give people platitudes when they're grieving. I say, you know what, it's shit. Because I've been there, and the platitudes are grating and irritating and annoying. But people who haven't experienced a terrible loss haven't been through that, so they don't know how to handle it. And she's quite clearly so young, she does not know how to handle that conversation. So she just trails off.
But...
And that's not her fault, but...
Yeah, well, and to be
it's
fair...
a telling point of the character.
No, it's not her fault at all. But yeah, I was just gonna say a quick story on this. I always think you can always tell who's a good tour guide or not is when, if you're going around a historical site, is if you give them, if you sort of ask something that's a bit obscure and a real historical, real thing that most people wouldn't know, and you can see their eyes light up when you've asked them the question or whatever.
Yeah, if you think most tour guides probably get the same 10 questions 5 times a day.
Yeah. You can definitely tell that's a sign of a good tour guide. It's like, oh, this is like someone knows their stuff here. I want to answer this,
Though
that happened to me at Fishbourne Palace, just so people know.
Her being a bit of a shit tour guide.
It's deliberate. It's obviously deliberate.
It definitely serves a purpose in the movie, because she's not, having her not shy away from the subject matter would effectively be redundant, because what she can't tell us, the movie shows us.
Yeah, and it's really important that we do approach history unflinchingly, but there is a way of doing that with respect. And that's why the old man telling his granddaughter the story, that's why we're listening to him and not the tour guide.
Yeah.
Because he's telling the story unflinchingly. He almost sounds like he's smiling as he's telling the story. Like he's reminiscing. But it is really important that we see that there is a habit of doing that in real life. And that's the point where when you look at these modern things of people on the tour, the granddaughter, the grandfather, the tour guide, there is a point at which you look at it and you say, actually, that's how I would be. I wouldn't be able to talk about such and such a thing unflinchingly. And we all do it. There are certain things we don't talk about, or we let hang, or we leave to fill pregnant silences. So things that are unspeakable. And she is a very good representation of something we consider unspeakable. The thing about when things are unspeakable, that's when they become allowed to happen again. And, we'll get into that. Because then we get the first flashback, and when they're in the barracks, and the guy's praying, and he's, what are you praying for? Do you see God here? And the argument kicks off.
I mean, I think before that we have the flashback to the selection, which is the sword of Damocles that is hanging over everyone.
Well, no, because they're in the barracks, and then it's sort of flashback within a flashback where you see them having to run. What they did, they stripped them down, put them in a very cold room, and then you have the moment where it goes to the tour guide saying, it's cold in here, isn't it? Imagine how much colder it would have been during a selection. And the men are forced to run down the room, and they're told to go left or right by the doctor, who's not even paying attention.
Yeah.
It's very deliberately done. If you notice, he's talking to the other Nazi. They're chatting away, and every so often he just glances up at whoever stood in front of them, and on a split second makes a decision, left or right, left or right.
And
left or right.
That's the thing when you see that
he's
whole
that
whole scene where you can see like one or two of the prisoners are making this deliberate effort to look like
stand up straight,
run up strong,
stand up straight, don't slump. You look half dead already, and then the other one, he already is dead. And it's,
yeah, the people were like, left, right. Well, what? He's not paying attention to who's honestly not really paying that much attention to who is going to go essentially to the gas chamber and who's going to be spared for work.
And
Yeah.
well, because ultimately to him it doesn't matter.
And ultimately, we see in the film, it doesn't matter whether they were sent left or right.
Yeah.
Because on the head of a pin, who lives and who dies changes. Or what they think who lives and who dies changes. Because they don't know what the criteria is for survival.
Yeah.
And it is strongly hinted that this is closer towards the end of the war. And I'll get into why later on.
Yeah, I got that.
It is strongly hinted.
Yeah, I did get that hint as well. Throughout
But we'll put a pin in that because that's important to the end of the film. But it is strongly hinted this is near the end of the war as well.
Yeah.
And then they start to... They're in the barracks. And it's the criminal, the non-Jew, who's ran about, oh, you think your God's here, and, did this, that, and it's him who really catalyzes this idea, the non-Jew.
Yeah.
And I will say in this film, there are several slurs thrown around. You almost don't notice them because of everything else that's going on, but there are several slurs that get thrown around. And they start the trial. Well, let's contextualize it. What's happened? They're all in the barracks after the selection. New people have been brought in, and these people are still dressed in their clothes. They've still got facial hair and hair. There's still some of them carrying suitcases and wearing jewellery. And there's this difference between... And it's almost said of, because you've arrived, some of us are now going to die. And that is said outright.
And you see especially you see the capo in this scene.
Yeah. And you see...
and you get a bit of maybe a bit of his anger or whatever at the like hey, what are you all doctors and lawyers who wouldn't look down, would have looked down on like to me
if I was on fire, kind of thing.
But basically in here, I'm God.
Yeah.
To you,
And there is this moment where they arrive.
There's a great line in his in his speech. The world's turned upside down and you've fallen off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's this great bit where they first arrive, and there's this really human moment where one of them has said, we're from such and such a place. And one of the guys on the bunk pulls himself forward into the light towards them and says, there was someone there, do you know him? And the guy says, I know him, he's a big fat bloke, he used to be a doctor. And they have this moment of, oh, I know, did he get away?
Yeah.
And then there's another one where he says, the man stands up and one of the other people who's just arrived says, I was in such... And then they see each other and they said you'd gone to America.
Yeah.
And the line that comes back is, did anyone survive? Did anyone get away?
Yeah.
And that becomes the premise of the film, as they have to assume, because this has gone on for so long, and there are so many people who've been killed. There's one person who says, I saw more people in an hour than I've ever seen before in my entire life combined, as we were being brought in.
And I thought, how many people could be living in the same place, and then I thought, how many people could die?
Yeah. And so they come to this conclusion that they have to assume they are the last Jews. They have to assume they are the last. They are the blessed remnants of the Jewish people. And that's the basis on which they finally make the conclusion of the trial. They have to take that as given, in the same way they take as given that God exists and that these things happen. And there's a lot of...
And obviously, this becomes the argument, doesn't it? I mean, obviously, it becomes the argument about if they're going to put, obviously, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead slightly, but this becomes the kind of argument of, yes, we should put God on trial, but then this comes to the debate of, well, what for?
What
What
good
do
will
we
it do?
What do we put God on trial for?
Yeah. And this is the thing. And that takes up a good third of the film, deciding what the charges are. The charges are, is God indifferent? Well, no, because there was never anything under law that said God had to care. Was there...
murder, murder, indifference, and more murder is too broad.
Yeah, it's not a legal argument. And then they sit down and they say no. And the man says, God had a covenant with the Jews, and he recites the passage that says, and God will basically lay down your enemies before you, and you will be blessed, and you will be, you are my people. Has God broken that covenant? And that's the basis on which they form the trial. And they have the judge, who is a judge in a former life, so he knows legal precedent and how to run a law. There's a really dark moment, but it is actually hilarious in that dark way, where they say, for this court to be valid, there must be a Torah present.
Yeah.
And the comment from the capo of, great, yeah, sure, would you like me to go get you some cigars and a woman to fuck while I'm at it? Like, we're in a concentration camp, like...
Yeah, I'll pop out and get this stuff, And it's like, it's like...
it creates this dichotomy of how do you practice your faith? How do you do anything when everything has been taken from you?
Yeah.
But they find a way around it. There's a rabbi who is, they say dumb, but he's essentially, I presume, traumatized in some way, because all he keeps doing is repeating the Torah over and over and over. So they say, well, he's the Torah. They call him the living Torah.
Well, they wanted to call, because they wanted to call a rabbi. They really felt we need a rabbi, because we need someone to speak on, and we need, because it's like, we need someone to speak on behalf of God. God needs defense.
Yeah, God deserves a defense. And therefore the rabbi refuses to do it, and then the scholar stands up and says, but to all intents and purposes, this boy should have been a rabbi. He is the best student I ever had. He is a scholar and a gentleman. And there's this great dark irony that hangs over it, that in a situation where they are prisoners, they have been dehumanized beyond all that there are scholars and legal professionals and physicists. There's a very good physicist in there. There are a glove maker.
We'll get to him. I think we should put a pin in that. We'll get to him later.
Yeah, we'll get to him later. But the point is, these are the intelligentsia, if you like. These are the elites of the elites.
Well,
these are
the intelligentsia mixed in with commoner trades.
That's what I'm going to.
Yeah.
There, you've got the intelligentsia in the same room as a criminal, in the same room as, and I'm not gonna repeat what they called him, but as someone who either is or hasn't been accused of being gay. They are, and it's this, or has committed some other form of sexual deviancy. They are in the same room as a thief, as and they're all stuck in there together, and they are all equals in there.
Yeah.
Everyone gets a say in this film. Everyone from the lowest criminal who rants and raves and kicks off, even the capo gets a say. as does the physicist, the scholar, the judge, the lawyer. They are all equal in this room because that's what this has done to them. It has utterly destroyed their social structure. But
and
above
essentially,
all, they are...
it's almost as if they become the situation they're in. The people who imprison them view them as all equally worthless. That's
Yeah. And so we get... And the people that arrive are Polish Jews. That's a point to make, that they're being brought in from Poland. Just because they're being brought in from small villages, it's... And so you imagine that in real life, there'd be about 5 different languages in this room. There'd be German, there'd be Polish, there'd be Russian, there'd probably be French. There's definitely French. There'd be... Is the spoken version of it Hebrew? Or Yiddish, maybe?
one of the 2 languages.
I did say at the start, I'm not... There's a bunch of spoken languages going on here. But they're communicating and they're having these conversations.
Again, let's reiterate the point. None of us in here are Jewish or unnecessarily knowledgeable in certain areas, so don't judge us. But if anyone who is Jewish wants to correct us on stuff,
comments,
please do.
Twitter,
please comment.
Hit us up,
yes,
please.
Hit us up. Let us know.
So, and then there's a conversation that happens where they talk. Someone says God is just. This is the line that comes out. God is just, and then they get into this big discussion about what use is God's justice personal or proportional?
Yeah.
Is it just that man was forced to bury his mother and desecrate her corpse? Is it just that man was given a Sophie's choice of his 3 children? No, but
Again,
is it just that the Jewish people, and that they go down this rabbit hole of maybe we deserve this, maybe we did something to deserve this, and they do interrogate that idea.
Well, this is the thing, because the whole premises trial is God stands accused of breaking his covenant with the Jewish people, and so they have to obviously examine this question of,
did they break it first?
Did we break it? Did we break it? First before before we accuse God, we have to look at ourselves.
Yeah. And
do we deserve what's happening to us?
This analogy of God as the surgeon.
Yeah.
And the purification, and the idea that this is a Holocaust is a sacrifice of the best, a burnt offering of the best, in order to bring about a greater revival. And there's comments passed about if this results in a return to Israel for the Jewish people, will it be worth it? And one of them says yes. One of them says yes, it will be worth it. One of them, they talk about the idea that if they are the cancer and God is the surgeon, does that make the Nazis the knife? Yeah. And what does that imply about fighting the Nazis and opposing them? Which is a hell of a thought.
That's a really amazing question.
There's this retelling of the story of Masada. Now, I've looked up Masada. I deliberately looked this up. Masada is a story that's only told once anywhere by Josephus.
Yes.
And the story goes exactly as they say in the film. Rebel Jews against the Romans went up into the mountains, found a thing, decided they would rather die than be enslaved. So basically, by process of elimination, they killed themselves, and only 2 women survived to tell the story.
Yeah. Obviously,
you can say what you like about the truthfulness of that story. Does it matter? It's a
again,
story within a story of does it matter, or is it the
doesn't
message of the story
it
that
doesn't
matters?
necessarily matter. Obviously, Masada is a real place. It's an
It's part of
archaeological
Israel
site.
now.
Yeah, it's and if you actually see the site, yes, it looks on the surface, it looked like an impregnable fortress where this, the last remnant of the Jewish resistance to the Romans, you know, theoretically could have held out for many years, but perhaps they didn't necessarily count on the engineering skills of the Romans. They
If there's
found
one thing you should count on with the Romans, it's their ability to build.
there was one there was like one tiny little weakness in the fortress which the Romans exploited.
Yeah.
And yeah, rather than make that last stand and fight to the death, that they, because they knew it was going to happen. Yes, yeah, everyone um, essentially, committed mass suicide or whatever the story is. But
They martyred themselves. The words are
yeah,
said repeatedly. They are martyrs for the cause. They are martyrs
And
for the
and
broader
this
Jewish people.
and
Hang on,
this
Ring
is
was about to say something.
and
ring gone.
which leads to the questions: are they martyrs in the camp?
But to be a martyr,
Which
you
is the
must
question.
choose to be a martyr. And they
Yes,
have
which
this
is where I
conversation
was
of
going to go.
are the children martyrs? Well, how can they be martyrs if they didn't choose it?
Yeah, you
Then are they a sacrifice? And if so, why?
and I think
What
this
kind of a
isn't
God wants the sacrifice of children?
yeah. And again, this is something. This again, it's not even necessarily exclusive to Judaism at this point with martyrdom. You can view this in terms of say Christianity as well. Generally, martyrs or saints or whatever, the people who have
Walked
chosen
willingly to their
their
death.
basically walked willingly to their death for their faith, for their belief.
Yeah, they are people who have decided that their principle or their belief, whatever it is more important to them than their own life.
Yeah,
Some
and
people
it's
in the Catholic Church, there was a push when I was a teenager. I don't know if it ever went through, to make Max Romero a martyr, or to make him a saint. Or there are stories of priests who took the place of children on the marches, who are in the process of being recognised as saints and martyrs because they sacrificed themselves. And I think the best way I've ever heard a martyr being described is someone whose sacrifice is their own life.
yeah. I mean,
But a willing,
martyrdom,
knowing martyrdom.
martyrdom doesn't even have to necessarily exist in a religious sense. It could be for a cause,
Yeah.
for any cause. I mean, okay, now I'll give a good example. And yes, now I will say the man was quite a pious religious man, but John Brown, who although was a white man, led one of the famous black slave insurrection in the United States, and essentially was hung for his crime, but knew that he was going to his death, and said the famous line that about America, the sins of this land will only be purged with much blood. And
Yeah, it's
he almost
like
become
the
and coming to the American Civil War, John Brown was almost the martyr to the cause for the abolitionists.
I am going to reserve comment on that final statement you made, but I can see the point you're making.
Okay.
I will say
It's arguable,
give
noodle,
it
but
no.
yeah.
There are certain things that are, but it's Sophie Scholl of the White Rose Society, who apocryphally her final words were, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail where there is hardly anyone willing to give himself up individually to a righteous cause? It is such a splendid sunny day, and I have to go. And then they shot her. Because she said she was part of the resistance. She was part of the student White Rose Society against the Nazis. She was one of the people who stood up and said, no, I will not go quietly. I will not live on my knees. I either kill me on my feet, because she decided, she made that decision. We all said at the beginning that is very difficult to grapple with. She made the decision of she would rather die fighting against the Nazis and everything they stood for than live under their regime.
It's that old adage of it's
live
maybe better to die on your feet or live on your knees.
Exactly.
Yeah,
she decided she was going to die on her feet. Yeah, and this is why we hold up people like Sophie Scholl as examples of an honourable, righteous death as modern day martyrs.
Yeah.
That's what she was. She was a modern day martyr to the cause. And, you know, whether she said that or not, again, is irrelevant. She died for the cause. So if we put some pretty words in her mouth that drive that point home, does it matter if she really said them? Or does it matter more what she did?
I mean, in essentially, though, I mean, in a certain thing, look, the question here is of, martyrdom or
slavery. It's martyrdom or slavery. Take your pick.
Martyrdom or slavery here, but I guess the bigger question, I suppose, is going on within this movie is God testing his people here once again?
That's a question they go through as well.
Big theme within this.
Yeah, that's a theme for a while, but then they come to the conclusion of, okay, but where in the covenant does it say God will test us? Where in the psalm that recites the covenant, Psalm 81, does it say God will test his people? Just because he's done it a few times and he's destroyed them a few times and it's habitual, doesn't mean it's in the contract.
Well, and
ergo, does that mean God broke his covenant with the Jews 3,500 years ago instead of today?
And well, yeah, and you know when the rabbi is listing through all the times that the Jews almost were wiped out, the judge says, "Oh, so it's habitual breach of contract."
Yeah, and just because it's habitual doesn't mean it's right. Is the point he's making there. And then there's this moment where the Nazis come in and all the freshly arrived Polish Jews who are still in their clothes get yanked out, and we go through, and we see this process of dehumanization.
When they haven't been
and the way it's filmed, and the way it's filmed, I don't know about you, I had flashbacks to watching Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
The hair cutting and the clothes and it had that and it's the dehumanization process.
Yeah.
When we talked about Full Metal Jacket, we talked about how the main point of military training is to dehumanize you and make you willing to kill. This is dehumanizing you to make other people willing to kill you. And it's the same process, damn it. It is the same process.
And that seems a little bit powerful between that. It's because obviously, because I'm assuming it's supposed to be Mengele.
No, it's not, because Mengele wasn't based at Auschwitz. But yes, Mengele does get a
Yeah.
No, Mengele wasn't Auschwitz.
Yes, he was.
Wasn't he at Buchenwald? Who was at Buchenwald? I'm sure Mengele was at Buchenwald.
Okay, hold on. We'll put a pin on that, and someone just anyone who's got access to a computer, just research that quickly.
Oh, no, he was at Auschwitz. Who was it? Who was at Buchenwald then? Because there was a doctor at Buchenwald who did a lot of medical testing.
Yeah, I mean, because they mentioned
Mengele was at Auschwitz.
They mentioned Mengele in this film as well.
One of the most chilling lines of the film.
I'm going to say something that's really disquieting. If you Google Mengele, there's a Wikipedia page of him in his SS uniform. There's a picture of him. It's a headshot, head and shoulder shot, smiling. And it just says underneath it, Mengele Auschwitz in 1944. And that's really a disquieting image.
Well, and yeah, so the disquieting, or like one of the most chilling lines of the movie is when the father's talking about his kids.
Mengele likes twins.
Yeah.
Yes.
That took me a moment.
But
like a moment to recover from, not a moment.
But there's a scene in the film where clearly, the guy looks like a doctor, so we can assume it's Mengele, whatever.
Yeah.
But they come in and the whole thing is, oh well, we apologise for the way you've been treated and you haven't been processed quickly enough.
Yeah, and then they immediately start being beaten and yanked out of there. That's gross.
And it's almost as if he's sincere about saying we apologise for the way you've been treated.
No, he gets the dark irony of what he's saying. He's laughing at them.
And but this guy comes in. He seems, at least on the surface, as sort of somewhat kind and reassuring. And then that happens. I think it's more that he's snide
and it's that deliberate cruelty of the schoolyard bully, isn't it?
Also,
it's almost hey, I'm sorry I've got to do this to you, but
also insert dark joke about pride in German efficiency here.
Yeah. And it is almost that. But the whole point I'm making, why I'm talking about this, they're taken out, their hair's cut, they're forced into these prison uniforms, the famous pajamas, if you like, the striped uniforms. They're given numbers, they're tattooed. Again, so far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's against Jewish law to be tattooed.
As far as I know, it is.
It is banned under Jewish faith, under Jewish practice.
I can't say much about Jewish practice, but I do in the Old Testament that in the book of Leviticus, it very much mentions tattooing is an abomination. I can't remember the exact quote.
You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo any marks on you. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:20.
Yeah. It's under Levitical law, so
it's part of Jewish law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
again, I only know the Christian interpretation.
Every aspect of who they are that's why it's considered such a horrendous thing that they were tattooed with numbers.
Yeah.
That's why that was so much worse than just putting a number on their chest or the star, because it broke Jewish law and it was against their will, and they were being,
we're forced to be criminals here.
Yeah. We are forced to be criminals here. We are forced to. The rules say that we have to grease our shoes to keep the oil out, but they don't give us grease, so we have to steal the grease. Who returned it? No one. Why? Because if you return it and you don't grease your shoes, you're gonna die. Ergo, you kept the grease, therefore you are a thief. Did you really have a choice in that? Was that a choice?
Yeah,
and they do got the Sophie's choice of which child do you pick. And
that was during the free will.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm talking about it is because I want to point something out. The scholar. Before they're dragged away, the scholar he knows who he is. He has a confidence about him. He's wearing his everyday clothes. He has a confidence about him. He speaks with authority on the subject. He doesn't stutter. He doesn't struggle. And he takes the compliment of, this young man is the best student I ever had. And then they come back and the judge says, where's the scholar? No answer. Where's the scholar? He doesn't answer. And then eventually he stands up and he says, I'm here. And they say, tell us, recite the psalm that the covenant is in. And he can't get past the first line because he's been stripped of everything and he breaks down in tears. They've stripped even that from him. They've taken even his academic ability from him by putting him through this process. And this is, you know, in a very, very... He is a microcosm of the way the humanity is stripped from them. He came in as the young scholar, intelligent, well-respected in the room. By the end of it, he's a sobbing, quivering mess because they cut his hair and took his clothes off him and took everything from him that made him who he was. And they took his ability to speak as well with that because they took the trappings of it. And that's the point I've been trying to get to.
Yeah.
He becomes symbolic of what that whole process was meant to do. And he's a very visible example of it. You know, he starts saying, you know, something about the first line of the Psalm. I think it's Psalm 81 that they keep repeating.
Yeah.
Yeah, sing aloud unto God our strength, make a joyful noise unto the God of Jacob. For this is a statute for Israel and a law of the God of... And he starts to say, and he can't get the words out because they've taken everything from him. And that's kind of this dehumanizing process. And in the end, what you have is all they have left to make themselves human is this belief in law and order and the procedure of the court, and it becomes important when the old man says, no, we should finish it because it's important, because this is what makes us men. Yeah. And I think now's a good time to talk about the physicist.
Yeah.
That's a good segue to the physicist,
and
I think.
The physicist presents his, evidence.
Yeah.
In that there are trillions of galaxies, or no,
a billion trillion stars.
No, there's 100,000 million stars in our galaxy alone, and he goes into that, and one out of them on the outer spiral rim has a planet that has life on it. And out of all the people on the planet, God chooses the Jews.
Yeah, so he's basically saying, why are you such children? Why do you think the universe revolves around you?
Yeah.
That's the question he's asking them to consider. And he talks about how children don't have object permanence.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, you're behaving like children. You're behaving like you think God cares. Like you are important in any way, shape, or form.
And during this speech, he talks about, polytheist societies had many gods, and then came along the Jews who had this great idea. We're only going to have one God, and we're going to have one authority, a king, which... as a statement has its issues, but for the purpose of discussing the film,
yeah.
And then came the Christians, who had the great idea of yes, there is one God, but he is for everyone, so let's conquer everyone.
Yeah. And then Hitler came along with an even better idea. There is one God, and it is me.
It's me, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a scathing indictment of religion, of monotheist religion. It really is. because the comments passed of societies are built around their religious ideas. So if you have one god, you have a king. Polytheist societies have multiple, they have senates and chambers and civil services. That doesn't actually play out in practice. But I can see he's making he's a very clever rhetorical device to make the point.
Yeah.
Of, and let's be honest, historically, and I would say this historically, as a historian I say this, 90%, 95% of the reason Jews had problems, particularly pre-Christian, and pretty much right up until the era of the Crusades, give or take, the reason people had a problem with Jews pretty much until the real boom of Christianity is because they had one God and they refused to worship any others. That's the reason the Romans had problems with them, because the Romans collected taxes through the temples. So if you weren't going to the temples and weren't praying to the multiple gods, you weren't paying your taxes. That's why it appears in the Christian Bible. Give unto God what is God and give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Yeah?
Yeah.
The point is, you don't have to worship their gods to pay taxes to them. You don't have to recognise them as gods to pay their rules. And that's why Christianity survived. Because Christianity, for a long time, there was a good, at least 3-4 centuries, I would say.
Yeah.
Ish, but generally, where Christianity and Roman polytheism rubbed along perfectly fine. Where people worshipped Jupiter and Jesus. That was a thing that happened. But the Jews, as a culture, as a people, couldn't abide that. They worshipped their God and no other. And they didn't. And there's a discussion about Masada in. Okay, because they talk about Masada, and there's this in. Are you sometimes so unyielding that that's what breaks you?
Yeah.
You can't bend, therefore you break. Because there's this unwillingness to compromise, to perform syncretism, to pay lip service. That's what got them historically into a lot of trouble. I'm not saying rightly or wrongly.
Yeah.
But this unwillingness sometimes to pay lip service caused them a lot of problems.
But
paying lip service goes against their religion, so they don't do it.
Well, and also they bring up the fact that that's not the case here.
Exactly. Because even if you do pay lip service, even if you didn't even know you were Jewish, you've been rounded up.
And I think you put, and I think that's a good point to get onto that. The character in this, the character in this though, who didn't even realise he was Jewish until they found he was and sent him there, and he was a good quote unquote.
I was a good German. I was a Jew-hating German.
Good quote unquote Jew-hating German.
Yeah.
And this guy in this character, I feel I feel possibly makes the most moving speech in this movie.
Absolutely. Yes.
To me, of he had been he had been taught, and he believed that the Jews were this dirty, filthy, inferior race. I'm sorry for my language on this, but
that's what he believed. I will say,
and
two things I want to say. I just want to cut in 2 things. First of all, hands up. It wasn't said that explicitly, but that's how I was raised. Jews are different to us. Jews are cowards. Jews are money thieves. I heard older relatives who were around when this went on, so you would think would have some sympathy for it, saying things like, never trust a Jew with your money. I've heard people
Yeah,
say that in real life.
but just
Give a
but
Jew a penny and he'll take a pound.
yeah,
I've heard
that
those
but
comments
this
pass.
whole
They're
thing is
horrible, but they all are part of the same
Yeah.
propaganda. And even to the
yeah,
point where he says in the thing, even the filth is deliberate in the
Yeah.
camp.
but
Do you really
yeah,
think it's an accident they didn't put enough plumbing in? No, it's deliberate.
well, exactly. This is the point he's making. He is, even when he was sent to the camp, he still believed that you know the, the Jews were, even when he was sent to the camp, to him the Jews were, you know subhuman. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way. They were not real. They were not real people, and you know, but because he had a bit of, however amount of Jewish ancestry, he was sent there, and
And
the fact that he during his that time maybe learned that actually for the first during that time in the camp he learned a bit about what it is to be Jewish and a bit about Jewish people, kind of made, okay, broke his illusions of what he believed. And then there comes ultimate that ultimate crescendo of this speech of, they have taken everything from you and us. They
Don't
have
let them
taken
take your God.
everything from your identity, from you, they've taken, they've taken your family, they've taken your livelihoods, they have taken your identity. Basically, but basically, he said the plea he is making is, the only thing you have left is your God. Don't let them
And
take this from you.
I keep coming back to Masada because I think it's important that they invoke Masada when they're talking. Because essentially how this film ends is a Masada case.
Yeah.
It's a case of Masada again. Where you see them, there's this great rush of movement in what has been a largely stationary show so far. It gets really rushed and hurried. Guards come in, they're being called out, and people are pushing and shoving, and the old man is yelling because his son's been called and it should have been him. And there's quickly, that they're negotiating to try for the son's life, and so he bribes the guard, so the guard pulls him back, and he bribes him with a packet of cigarettes or something, and then it all happens very quickly.
And it's
then
all over the officer reading off numbers and the prisoners praying.
Yeah. And they're all praying.
Nuts.
Even though they've found God guilty. They've found God guilty because the line is said, God is guilty, now what? And now we pray.
Can we actually speak, before we get to it, can we actually speak about the verdict itself?
Yeah. So the verdict itself is
that
breaking. I've got this speech here. So I've got it. Judges are 3 in number to always have a decision or a majority for a point of view. The accusation is God has broken his covenant with the Jewish people. Who brought us out of Egypt? Finally, someone says some common sense. God brought us out of Egypt. Another question, why at first in Egypt there was a famine and by therefore we take refuge? Who sent the famine? Well, God sent the famine. So God sent the Israelites to Egypt and out of Egypt, and then Babylon. And when we're out of Egypt, had with words, visions, miracles, no, what did he do? And they go through and they talk about the plagues and everything else. And then it comes first and it says, God killed the firstborn of Egypt and us out of Egypt. He killed the firstborn, the heir of Pharaoh, to the firstborn of the slaves in the mills, murdered them all. Why didn't he kill Pharaoh? He killed their children instead. And then the people of Israel could leave, taking with them gold and silver and jewelry and clothing dress of the Egyptians. And then God drowned soldiers who pursued them, closed the waters to the soldiers who could not follow. He did not close it so they could not follow. He waited until they were following and then closed the waters. Then the desert and finally the promised land. Is this a new place? No, it as written, when the Lord your God I take you to land and sacrifice many nations before you, much bigger countries and more powerful than you, and will annihilate and completely destroy them, and will do no covenant with them, and will show no compassion towards them. And they start talking about historical compassion. King Saul, who did Saul show mercy? No, he murdered men, women, babies, newborn, oxen, sheep, camels and donkeys. He was prepared on the way. He met with the Canaanites. However, these were not people of Amalek. He told them to run. Was God pleased with that? No. When Saul took the cattle to feed its people rather than slaughtering it, was God pleased? No. And therefore and then God rejected him as king. And there's this entire bit where they talk about how the way David is punished, not by punishing David or Bathsheba, but by punishing the child, who doesn't die suddenly and mercifully without pain, but for 7 days in agony while David tries desperately to plead with God. And was that fair? Was that right? And this all leads up to when he says, I'm trying to find it here, talks about how these people died for their purpose. They fell like now Jews are falling. They were scared as well. And what did they learn? They learned that God is not good, was never good. God was only on the side of the Jews. God is not good. God is only strong. And that's really important because God is presented here as almost a classical heroic figure, as someone who might is right, is how God's presented. And then he asks, what had these people done to deserve to be annihilated? What could they have done that was so bad? And repeats, God is not good. He says, when God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, Abraham should have said no. We should have taught to our God justice that was in our hearts. He is not good. He has simply been strong and on our side. And then someone steps in and says, a guard slapped me, and on his belt it wrote, God mit uns, God is with us, and who's to say he isn't? What is the other explanation? And so this is the conversation that happens, and they find him. This is what happened to the pact. He has made a new deal with others. We are now entering to the gas chambers, and so he is guilty for not complying with the agreement, for breaking the covenant with us. And that's the final verdict. God is guilty. God has broken his covenant with the Jews.
Yeah, and I think, well done, Noodle, because you recited that brilliantly. And
I had something resembling the script in front of me. But that feeds into, they had this conversation and I think it's important we go back to it and have that conversation of, if God has broken the covenant with the Jews and made a new covenant with the Nazis, is it then right to fight the Nazis? Or is it going against God? If God is good, then it is wrong to fight the Nazis. And please don't anyone ever take that out of context of what I've just said.
No.
But if God is good, then God's will is that this happens, ergo it is wrong to fight it. Therefore, not only does this, it's really important because they say God broke the covenant, but more importantly, God is not good. Ergo, it is still right to fight the Nazis and to fight
Yeah.
against them. That is an important part of the final proceeding and the statement that's made. Because if God is good and God has broken the covenant with the Jews, then it is good. I'm not going to complain because I don't want that sentence being put out on the internet of me saying that. Because someone will take it out of context at some point. But, you know, that's what they're saying. They're saying if God is good, then all of this is right. So, first of all, we have to establish that God is not good.
Yeah.
And that's important because the definition of a hero changes from society to society. In classical literature, ancient Athens, a hero was someone who was strong, who performed great deeds. They didn't have to be a good person. Heracles was a fucking wanker. You know, I'll say it. He was a utter wanker. Most of them were. In ancient Greece, Odysseus was a hero. And yet you hear in the Iliad over and over again the liar Odysseus, the man of two faces, cunning Odysseus, sneaky Odysseus. He's not a good man.
Yeah.
He's a clever man who performs great deeds. And that's what makes him a hero. In our modern understanding of what a hero is, totally different.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And even from the 1930s, if you look at the development in comic books of Captain America, in
Or
the
Superman.
1950s, in the 1950s,
Well-
the hero was a good soldier who followed orders, did as he was told, and was patriotic. If you tried to make a film now, and you had that soldier who followed orders without question, did as he was told, and was red, white, and blue all over, and would bleed to keep the flag red, that would not gel with a modern audience of what a hero is.
Well, Noodle, I'll say this. I mean,
Hang on, Ring had something to say.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up about Captain America.
Yes, and the whole Hydra deal. Ugh.
Well, but no, seriously. So, you know, in the comics, Captain America was very much, you know, in the 1940s, Captain America was very much a propaganda comic.
Yeah.
And he even now, 1940s Captain America can be held up as something of an ideal as a hero because he was fighting the Nazis.
He's a paragon, yeah. But he's a paragon hero. He's not a classical hero in that sense. As
things got past and into the modern age, past the Comics Code Authority era, Captain America starts questioning the government an awful lot. And
yes,
this is the point. As wars become more complex, we can you think of a war that has happened in the last 30 years where you would absolutely, hand on heart, categorically say, I know who the people who were in the right fighting that war? Absolutely,
exactly.
I know those people were good and those people were bad. Therefore, a hero who is good and knows what he's doing is good no longer gels with a modern audience because that doesn't exist anymore.
Well, I was going to say, Noodle, you brought up like classical literature. You brought up like the Iliad and the Odyssey. That within Greek society, Achilles was the big hero.
And Achilles was a world-class prick. Achilles was a prick.
Yeah, I think to us in modern times, in that story, what we would think of a hero is more along the lines of Hector.
Hector is the classic paragon hero. Defended his home, didn't do anything wrong.
Defending his home.
In a kind of twisted, roundabout way, Hector was only following orders.
Yeah.
Which is really a dark comment to make when discussing Nazis.
I mean, I know, considering the implication of this, but Hector's kind of the guy. He didn't really want this fight.
His brother was playing silly beggars.
He's not fighting. He's
but
not
he had a
fighting.
duty.
He had it was out of a sense of duty, he's not fighting for his own personal glory, which is what Achilles was fighting for, and almost goes into that. He goes into that duel with Achilles, even knowing that the likely outcome of this is he's going to die. You know, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Exactly.
To us, in our like, modern sense of the word, hero,
He's the
Hector
martyr
is
of the Iliad.
Hector. Yeah, Hector is the hero of that story.
I wouldn't say he's the hero, but he's definitely the martyr. He's the person.
Mm.
He's the one, and I say this advisedly because times change, etc. He's the closest person within the Iliad who is unproblematic. He has a
Yeah.
job to do and he does it out of a sense of duty and loyalty to his family. And do you know what it is? It's not personal, it's strictly business with Hector. And that's the thing that people don't realise with a lot of Germans under the Nazis. For a lot of Germans, it was not personal. It was strictly business. It was just these people. It wasn't personal. And that is a really difficult thing to... Because at certain times in history, it not being personal, it being strictly business is a virtue. And other times, it is a terrible, terrible vice and sin.
And I think, again, you've got to look at...
And when you look at Mengele, the doctor being distracted, and that's clearly just strictly business to him. It's not personal. It's just business. Again, it's just his job. It's just,
You've got to understand the history in this period that, like, anti-Semitism in Germany or anywhere in Europe, to be honest, that point. Now, you can say there's definitely people who grew up under the Nazi regime or whatever, that, yes, might have been young people, but grew up and were indoctrinated with these anti-Semitic ideas. But those ideas started way before 1933, way before.
Those ideas go back to
way before
like
the
the
National
1200s at least.
Way before the National Socialist Party of Germany was ever conceived of. I mean, because I knew. I'll just give a story publicly. Noodle and I, we've had a little talk about this privately, about when we've, should we say, people who use history as trolley to ask a trolley problem question.
That irritates me.
Yeah, the whole thing of well, crikey, we've talked about the Holocaust enough of this, so we might as well just go all out here. Like, if you could kill Hitler when he was a baby, would you do it? Kind of thing.
Would you kill a baby? An innocent baby? On the off chance. And if you did, what's to stop? If it wasn't Hitler, it would have been Stalin. If it wasn't Stalin, it would have been someone else. Why kill Hitler?
Thing.
Why don't you go back and kill Pol Pot? Why don't you go back and kill Emperor Nero? Why Hitler? And what real practical good would that?
The whole point being though that it's a misunderstanding of history to think that racist ideology started and ended with Adolf Hitler. No, it didn't. He was not born in a vacuum here, and there was. If it had not been him, it would have been somebody else.
Exactly, and we see in a modern context of. Do you think President Cheeto happened in a vacuum? No,
exactly.
He's a symptom of the wider causes.
Mm.
He's not a cause; he's a symptom. There's no point in treating the symptom when the disease is still there.
I've had this argument numerous times with people over the last 4 years about that guy. These things didn't start and end with certain people who had ideas and rhetoric.
Oh no, these things
'Cause-
started in the 1200s. These things
Yeah.
started in the Renaissance, and the stereotype of the Jewish banker. But why were Jews bankers? Because they were banned from doing anything else.
And
Yeah.
also
Again,
because
they were forced into those roles and then vilified for it.
Yeah, vilified for the fact that because technically usury was a sin under Christian law, didn't apply to Jews. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
they could offer loans and
Charge interest.
charge
Yeah.
interest on it. So there was this weird, weird thing that went on that you had Jewish people throughout Europe that the certain monarchs or whatever would go to for loans, but then they'd be vilified for it, even though they were bankrolling.
Most of
It
the
was-
European royalty. Yeah,
It's
totally.
in a lot of
Well,
ways, it's a
yeah.
very weird situation. But
What I was gonna say is because since usury was a or for a modern audience, charging interest was a sin under the Catholic Church, and banking being one of the only one of the few trades Jewish people could actually hold, a lot of money collected into Jewish communities because they could actually charge interest. And whenever a crown got strapped of cash, there
They
were the
went to
Jews ripe for prosecuting.
Yep. And when you prosecute them, what happens? You take their assets. But they've only got your assets because you went to them for a loan in the first place, and you only went to them for a loan in the first place because there are no other jobs they could do, so they do that one because of what you said. So there's a. The reason I say that, because we were talking about, what were we even talking about? We were talking about how, and this film goes into it in that speech from the judge where he says, "I'm not a Jew, but I looked around and I see that everything here is deliberate to strip you of your humanity." Do you think it wasn't deliberate that Jews were forced into working as bankers for centuries? That was deliberate. That was big. If you don't want a Jewish banker charging you interest, let them work as a greengrocer and an electrician and a plumber and this, that and the other. But they were barred from things like that by virtue of being Jewish. Like, literally under Western European laws, Catholic monarchs, there were certain jobs that Jews literally were not allowed to do. And it's only when it went to extremes in Germany, by a man led by a man who I will point out wasn't even German, that they finally looked at it and said, "Hang on, that's what caused all this." But people don't want to admit that. People don't want to admit that anti-Semitism came before Hitler. It's this great man view of history, and I can't stand it because it's too simplistic and it doesn't give credit. And I say credit, but it doesn't recognise the true causes. But also, there was something I wanted to point out. I saw a documentary once because we were talking about how regular Germans were complicit and it was strictly business for them. I saw a documentary once and it horrified me. There was a woman, she must have been in her 80s or 90s. She was German and they were interviewing her and she lived through all this. She was a Christian German. She didn't, she wasn't part of any part of the Holocaust. She was just a regular person. She'd grown up. She'd taken part in the Hitler Youth or, and things like that. She'd done all that. And there was a line she came out with and she said, people don't like to admit it, but life was good under the Nazis. And she said that. She said for the regular Germans, life was good. Because there was food on the table, the economy was good. And and she said, from her point of view, before Hitler came along, life was bad. there was poverty after the First World War and everything else. And she said the reason the Germans were complicit is not because they hated Jews, although that probably played a role. A lot of the reason is because they had a better life as a result of what the Nazis were doing. It's that personal, individualistic, me.
Yeah,
it's that selfishness. And sometimes it doesn't go beyond that.
I guess it's the whole maybe historical materialism question.
No, but she even said Germans knew what was happening. They knew. They just didn't care because they had food on the table, shoes on their feet, and a coat on their back, and life was good. So they didn't care.
Yeah.
And that's how you get cultures to be complicit. You give them what they didn't have before. And you've got to remember, Germany was coming out of the recession caused by having to pay the reparations from the First World War, which were horrendous. There's a comic image, if you can find it, a drawn image of it's black and white etching, and it's a starving woman holding a starving baby in what looks like a rundown tenement room. There's like the crib is black and broken, and there's water dripping, and it looks like the worst living space you could imagine. And the thing is, I will feed you, child, when we have paid England millions of marks, because that's the debt Germany owed from the First World War, and that's what Hitler preyed on, and that's why the Germans took it, because he gave them a better life. That's why there were no reparations after the Second World War, by the way.
I want to expand, and I want to expand a little on what you said there. Just to be that, yes. Now, I think everyone could probably agree that the Versailles Treaty was seriously unfair on Germany. But what happened? I mean, there was a period in between 1918 where Germany it was almost a Marxist revolution in Germany that got crushed for various reasons. But Germany thrived in the 1920s, really on the back of loans from America.
The Marshall Plan was Second World War.
Yeah. This is they really, but they really thrived on loans from America, and the Weimar Republic. It was actually become very prosperous. I mean, even though the sort of whole German nationalist and anti-Semitism was a thing, it was still very much a minority thing. Then something happened in 1929 that changed the game, the Wall Street crash. Essentially, the Great Depression is what really turns the tables.
And guess what? In 2008, the economy crashed, and look where we are.
Yeah. We're
really predictable as a species.
Yeah. I mean, generally, when there's a crisis within the system, there tends to be a polarization with people who will either go to the left or the right. It's no big secret that in the early 30s, the two biggest political parties became essentially the Nazis and the communists, because the mainstream political parties had all but collapsed, and it essentially the mainstream sort of more conservative political parties didn't deal with fascism because they saw that as the lesser of the two evils.
Yeah, if you want a modern example of that, it's essentially Antifa versus the Proud Boys is what's going on. It's the same concept. It's the same process that happens when there is an economic downturn. The thing is, the Wall Street crash happened and Germany could no longer afford to pay the reparations.
Well,
why I say it's because of the reparations that Hitler got a stronghold. Because if they'd not had to pay that, they'd have probably got by a bit better after the Wall Street crash. It does go back to those reparations.
It was the reparations. It absolutely does go back to that. But for a time, American banks or whatever were willing to give Germany massive loans to rebuild their economy. However, the Wall Street crash happened. Suddenly, all the banks wanted their loans cashed in.
And all the banks are run by?
Germany got hit. Yeah, Germany got hit probably even arguably worse than the United States got hit with the Great Depression.
Yeah. But again, the banks are run by Jews because traditionally that's their jobs, and also because the banks are run by Jews and the Jews are prosperous even during the downturn, it's their kids who are going off to university who are forming the bedrock of this upper class society of judges, lawyers, scientists, musicians, artists, writers. They're Jewish because they're the ones who can afford an education. And therefore they become the perfect scapegoat for the National Socialist Party.
Yeah.
And then this happens, and all these, the idea of the dirty, misorganized, lawless, greedy, lazy, those are not Hitler's ideas. You can see those ideas in the Renaissance. You can see them in the Crusades.
But
those ideas, you can see them in writings from the Crusades, where literally you've got Catholic monarchs and Catholic people in Western Europe saying, why are we fighting their war for them? They're lazy. They're willing to give up the holy life, and it's nonsense. But it's propaganda, and that propaganda really, it was just accepted.
And I want to say, I think you've hit on something here, Noodle, that I think is an important thing to say for perhaps, almost to tie a bow on the stream in a certain way, that this is what you just said is the big contradiction of racist arguments, whether it be against Jewish people or black people or whoever, that there is this thing of these people are lazy, whatever, they're uncivilized,
but they're still stealing our jobs and our schools.
Yes, but they are still stealing our jobs and schools, and they are plotting against us, and they have the power to take this. This is the big central contradiction of all racist arguments that I know of.
They are doublethink.
These people are these people are lesser than us, but at the same time, they're in a position where they can plot against us and have power over us. It is the big contradiction, and the big, very just on the surface. I don't think most people. Most people are with us and can see that how illogical that is. But that is, I think, the big contradiction at the center of every racist argument I've ever heard. Yeah,
not just racism, just bigotry in general is contradictory.
And by the way, can I ask you guys, as you both go by the they/them programs, when do I get a invite to the transgender meetings?
When you start going by they/them.
If I do that next week, can I get an invite?
Yeah. You got me to turn it for a bit first.
Yeah.
But no, there are two things I want to talk about. Two really important points. First of all, we talked about the film, we talked about the philosophical debates. Was the actual judgment, God is guilty, was it actually relevant? Because the first thing they did, it goes, therefore God is guilty. And they said, what do we do now? Now we pray.
We pray.
If God is not guilty, what would they have done? They'd have prayed for forgiveness.
Yeah.
So what they're essentially saying is, and this is the great contradiction of this film. That it's completely irrelevant. Because the outcome, in practical terms, remains the same. Whether God is guilty or not, the outcome is the same. And that's why the Krabby's comment earlier that you put up, God had nothing to do with it. God was not yeah. The entire point of this film is saying God, religion, everything, it's nothing to do with it. It's the humanity and the people that matter. That's why it doesn't matter what religion, race, colour, creed you are. This was an atrocity that happened. And we can all agree on that. Because God is irrelevant to that. The Holocaust did what 2,500 to 3,000 years of Jewish history had never done before. It broke down we'll say 2,000 years of history had never done. It broke the barrier between Jew and Christian. And it said how we worship is irrelevant.
Yeah.
God is irrelevant. Which religion we ascribe to is irrelevant because we are all human beings. And that's that's what came out of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask a question because this film does drive you to ask this question. Was it worth it?
Oh my, that is a difficult question. That is such a difficult question. Because it's saying, essentially it's saying that people from various different faiths, different ideas, or whatever, were able to come together on the outcome of how disgusting, how sick this event in human history was.
God became irrelevant. What became relevant was the humanity and people. No, you weren't just following orders. There are certain rules. The Geneva Convention came out of it.
But I guess I don't know that I can answer this question, honestly. I don't know that I can give an answer to this one way or the other of whether this was worth it.
So,
because
let me give you a few facts and figures. So, conservatively, across all types that the Nazis hated, conservatively about 16 million killed in camps. Conservatively. That includes Romani, that includes gays, that includes Russians, that includes prisoners of war, that's everyone. Conservatively, 16 million. Yeah? That's not including the soldiers who fought and died in the Second World War. That's just the ones killed in the camps. Add on the ghetto to the Second World War and everything else, yeah? The creation of the State of Israel and everything else and everything that's followed on from that, the good and the bad. The good and the bad, and that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm not going any further into that.
Yeah, that could be a whole other stream in itself.
The growth of a worldwide knowledge of, understanding of what constitutes a war crime, what constitutes what's the word I'm looking for?
Crime against humanity.
A crime against humanity. Taking all of that in, 14 million lives conservatively, plus those who died in the ghettos, plus those who died on the way to the camps, plus those who were sent out on marches, plus those who we have no record of anywhere because the papers were burned and so were the bodies and so were their own. You can count the shoes at Auschwitz and take a random guess of how many people were there, but how many of those were sold on or removed or anything else beforehand? And that's just Auschwitz. All taking in all that, knowing that there is no hypothetical one-shot solution to stop it. There is no one person you can point a gun at, kill, and that never happened. First of all, was it irrelevant? No, first of all, was it inevitable? And second of all, was it worth it? I think personally it was inevitable. Something had to give. You had the Dreyfus affair in France in the 1800s, you had the pogroms in the 1800s, and then you had this. It was all leading up. Something had to give. And it had to happen. Let's say it's one of those Doctor Who fixed point in time. It's got to happen. You can't stop it. Looking at where the world was before it happened, and what the Jews were living through, and what those minority ethnicities and everyone else was living through, and looking at life now, and looking at how things have changed, and our understanding of what humanity is and what good and evil is has changed. Was it worth it? And if so, is there any caveat that you would place on that? Because I bet we all have the same caveat.
Ring, you answer first.
I'd say only barely. And largely because a lot of us haven't learned the lesson that humanity needed to learn from the Holocaust.
Have we not learned it, or have we forgotten it?
Okay, my answer to that, I'm going to say, I don't think we've learned that lesson.
Yeah.
I think that's my feeling. And maybe what sometimes I become, I don't know, very disheartened and about our species. That the Holocaust is not the first act of genocide.
That was the word I was looking for, by the way, not crimes against humanity. Conducted by human beings. It wasn't the last either. There's been
and
Cambodia,
this is the problem. Yes,
Rwanda,
there was Cambodia, Rwanda. There's been stuff to ethnic cleansing in the Balkans.
In our lifetimes.
And
Rwanda was in 1993-94.
Yes, and the Balkans was in the same time period. The ethnic cleansing in the Balkans was in our time period. We've seen things even today as we speak, like with Muslim community in China being subjugated, and we don't know to quite extent what that's going on, but we have ideas.
They did it from outside Germany. They didn't know quite the extent that it was going on either.
And the whole thing is, I don't know. I'm trying not to get emotional about this response because
you feel dirty trying to say it, don't you? Be honest, who doesn't feel dirty having this conversation right now?
Yeah.
I feel absolutely
filthy. I sadly feel. You know how I've talked about in certain things how I've been somewhat slightly disgusted to be British before because of our past, whatever.
Yeah.
My nationality, whatever, and we haven't learned. Sometimes I've now got to the point where I feel disgusted by my species of human beings. These are things. These
we should have figured
things
out by now.
We should have learned from this stuff. Something like the Holocaust should never have happened in the first place, and should never happen again. And definitely should never happen again. I
have two answers to
genocide has happened, and I don't know. Maybe I've just got to a point where I'm maybe starting to lose my faith in human. And maybe this is a good whole question for this this whole stream is, where is our faith in humanity at right now? Honestly, my faith in humanity right now is
Is
pretty
at an
damn
all-time
low.
low. Yeah. And I think the reason I asked you both that question is because I have two answers to that question. I have the academic answer, and I have the personal answer. The academic answer is, throughout history works in patterns and cycles. And history tends to be one of those things where it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And in the broader frame of history, we are in that 1 step back stage after the 2 steps forward of the immediate aftermath of it, where everyone said never again, no. And we are now in that 1 step back phase of, are we going to do it again? Is something going to happen again like that? You know, is it happening now? And you know, that's the point in history we're in.
Yeah.
Broadly, from an academic standpoint, historically, the thing about 2 steps forward, 1 step back is, for every 1 step back, there's going to be another 2 steps forward at some point. So there will broadly be progress. And it will have been catalysed by our response to it. So if you want to strip all the humanity out of the question and just put it down on paper, history tells us that in the, and I mean in the long run, I mean in the hundreds of years timescale, there may be a point where historians look back and say it was worth it. Maybe. Because of the progress that occurred afterwards and the continuing progress. I say maybe, and I am speculating.
I'd love to hope you're right, and I'd love to hope you're right.
Personally, I think as a human being with empathy and who understands love and loss and sacrifice and duty and honour and all of those things that make us human, that we have decided as a species that's what separates us from the animals. Personally, I think it can never be worth it. It can never be worth it. The best we can do as a species is to try to learn from it, but we will never be worthy of it. The only way it will ever be worth it is if we could honestly, and we can't, so it's a moot point, but if we could honestly say, hand on heart, that was the last time and it would never happen again. And for a while afterwards, that was the hope, that was the dream.
Yeah.
It never again, we said.
And this was the whole thing where we established.
We can't say that,
law.
so that's why I asked that question, because it's such a complex question, and it deep dives straight into the core of the morality and ethics of this. Of, was it worth it? Only if we are worthy of it, and we are not as a species.
Yeah.
Will we ever get there? I have to hope we will. I have to. There has to remain in me one tiny part of me, however small, however dying it is. And, you know, I have lost a lot of my faith in humanity over the last couple of years. And, you know, and maybe that's just a part of getting older. Maybe it's not. Maybe the things I'm seeing in my life are things that have wiped out that faith in humanity. Because I used to be very hopeful for humanity. I'm not so much anymore. I think it's an accident we survived this long. But I will...
Maybe because I'm a bit older than both of you guys.
Continue.
The point I'm making is that for these things to be worth it, the fire of London, the Great Fire of London, was worth it. Why? Because they rebuilt better. They rebuilt fireproof. They brought in fire services. They learned to make sure it never happened again. So that was worth it. To an extent, the plague was worth it. Because we've got so far with medicine now. Will COVID be worth it? well, if it wipes out all the anti-vaxxers and we all learn that actually you do need to take vaccines when they go on and it keeps us all going for centuries, maybe it'll be worth it. I don't know. I'm not going to be around to see that time to know whether it's worth it. But this is the thing with all historical events. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We learn and then we forget. And then we learn and then we forget. And we do this. And the only way these things can be worth it is if we are worthy of them. And honestly, looking around in the year of our Lord 2022, we ain't worth it. We have not earned it. And we need to do better. As people, as countries, as trading blocks, as a species, we need to do better. And this film speaks to that. But this film, I think, I was almost disappointed with the way this film speaks to that. Because at the end, she says they found God guilty. And they're getting back on the bus. And she says, so what, and he turns to her and says, we're here. We're still here. Jews, as a general rule, and this is a positive thing, so no one come at me with IHRA, Jews that take the long view of history. They're thinking, we're thinking about next week, next month, next year, next 5 years. They're thinking as a people about 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years. They're planning ahead. We need to first of all learn to take that long view as well, because it changes the way you respond to things when you take that long view. And from the point of view of, yes, Jews survived, the state of Israel exists, the world for a short while became a better place where that step forward has been we no longer discriminate in such a systematic way against Jews as before this. That's a step forward. And then you look and you think, okay, but there's still Black Lives Matter, there's still feminist movements that need to happen, and those are the steps back. Trump happened, that's the step back. The next big push forward is got to be BLM, or it's got to be feminism or something. And then there'll be a step back. There'll be that step back of trans rights, there'll be the step back of LGBT rights. But then there'll be a push forward again. And the reason I asked, was it worth it, is because to even begin to justify suggesting that it might have been worth it, you have to take the long view. Which is what that comment at the end from the old man says, it's we're still here. Therefore, to an extent, it was worth it. But when you take the immediate short-term view, it can never be worth it. But only by taking that long view can we begin to position ourselves to be worthy of it.
And
I guess
make it worth it.
Ultimately, this is the whole thing of, will we get there eventually?
We have to. I have to hope. I might not live to see it, but I have to hope.
Now, maybe.
Otherwise, what the hell?
I know I won't get there to see it. I know I will be dead before this happens. I'd like to think one day we as a species, we're going to finally figure it out, and there's going to be a society that is fair and is just, when nobody gets left behind, and we don't hate over superficial shit. I really want to hope we get there. It's my hope that we get there. It's my ambition that we get there. It will not happen in my lifetime. It will probably not happen in your. It probably will not even happen in our children's lifetime. But I do think you know, it's. I mean,
As a
okay, we
whole,
can
as
get
a people, we
as a
will get there.
people, and I mean, okay, then we can obviously argue about things. I mean, okay, it could be in a whole nother stream. We can argue about the effects of something like climate change or whatever, what that will do to us as a species. Whether we'll be the agents of change or the victims of change, because change will happen. Um,
I'd like to point out Krabby's comment. Krabby is saying, don't ever say it's
yeah.
worse than it was 60, 70, or 80 years ago. It isn't, and we can do better by remembering
Oh
the
no,
details and be discussed. I agree. I
yeah,
would
I
also
agree with
like
Crab.
to add, if there ever comes a day where we can honestly, hand on heart, look around at our world and say, and not invoke the Holocaust because it is actually
Yes,
worse, then we've fucked up.
yes, I'll agree with this, and I can tell you this is something that maybe I can say something as a positive. Maybe I can say this is something as a positive. That I do know people who are both on the, should we say, political left and political right who might agree on this. Um, that people, basically, people who invoke the Holocaust to whatever is going on in their lives right now need to shut the fuck up.
They are
I'm
they are making
seriously
their own point
do.
that it's not as bad as the Holocaust, because if it was as bad or worse, you wouldn't be invoking the Holocaust, because that would be an understatement.
I
If we
think
ever
it's
get to that
basically.
point, we've
I think
seriously fucked up. But until
Yeah.
that point,
I basically think it's that I know there's people who are both on the left and the right who are like, stop invoking Godwin's law kind of thing.
sometimes Godwin's law is actually it's
I'm
there
not.
for a
Yeah,
reason. Like
it's there for a
sometimes it is
reason.
a valid comment.
It's not always invalid, but let's be honest. The vast majority of the time it's invoked is invalid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and you know, I mean, yeah, like for example, like okay, look, people who are anti-mask mandate, who start making the comparison or whatever. Hey, this is how Nazi Germany got started.
No, it's
Shut
not.
the fuck up,
Yeah.
please. Shut the fuck up. And
Yeah.
I'll say that for maybe people on the left who will go to those extremes, because I'm a left winger, people know. But I will say that for people who make those kind of extreme claims from the left, you know,
I
watch
think
the, what
what angers me about
watch a movie like this, and
and then
take
see
it
if you're
on
still willing to
board,
say that.
and then be honestly willing to say, are you still willing to invoke that? Because you, I, I guess, if I'm going to say something as a sum up comment, this whole thing is, do not invoke the Holocaust lightly. Really take the time to try your best to understand what happened here. Do not invoke this, the worst crime, arguably probably the worst crime in the history of our species. Do not invoke it lightly.
I think as well, I would add, obviously it's a very Eurocentric view to invoke the Holocaust. But also I would add, if you do invoke it, if you do see patterns in the world around you that honestly do echo it, mimic it, look like it, don't just sit there and point and say, that looks like that. A child can do that. A child can look at two pieces of fruit and say, Mummy, that's an apple and that's an apple. That's not doing history. That's not fighting it. Anyone can point at two things and say they look the same. Anyone can point at a duck and point at another duck and go, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, well, it's a duck. Anyone can do that. What you have to do, what you are, I think, morally obligated to do in order to be worthy of it, as I was saying, is to go beyond that and start saying, okay, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, and it's a duck, what the fuck do we do about it? That's when you take the leap from being just another Twitter commenter to being an activist, to standing up for what's right, to being human, and to being what we have all agreed as a species is what humanity is. When we agreed that humanity will say never again, we agreed that after this happened. It is now the duty of every individual, no matter where you are in the world, who you are, no matter your race, colour, creed, sexuality, gender, or any other distinguishing feature, it is now our duty to live that and to enforce it. Because we can pay lip service and hold minute silences and say never again until we are blue in the face. But there's no point in standing in front of a burning pyre of bodies and saying never again. Turn around and put the damn fire out. And that's what this film, that's the point this film drives home for me. The point is, it's not about God. It's not about whether God's right or wrong or covenants. It's not about good versus evil. It's about what is humanity. Who are you? Where do you stand? And more to the point, what are you willing to stand, fight, and yes, maybe even die for? And this film forces you to ask those questions. And I think we talked about at the start of this stream, we were saying, I can't answer that question. I think it's a great tragedy that anyone should be put in a position where they have to make that decision and they've never thought about it before. You might not know exactly in that moment if you're going to have the bravery to make the right decision. But you should take the opportunity when it's presented to you to have those conversations, meditate on those things, sit with those ideas. Because do you know what? Do you know what's a lot easier to go through with? A decision you've already made. Make the decision. Who you are, where you stand, what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Make that decision before you have to make it in a hurry. Because we, as a species, we are shit at snap decisions. We are fucking garbage at them. But when you sit and you think about it and you get into, yes, I'm willing to put up with X, but not with Y. If they tell me to do Y, I'll do that, but I won't do Z. Doesn't matter what your lines are. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to share that with anyone. But you should know who you are. And that's, to me, is what's important about this film. You saw the father and son bickering all the way through the film. And yet the father still put himself in line for his son. Because that was something he wasn't willing to stand. He was not willing to stand and watch his son be killed.
Yeah.
You saw you saw the judge, who wasn't even Jewish. He wasn't willing to look around at these people who had had everything stripped of them and take that last thing from them. He wasn't willing to do it. He wanted them to retain their humanity. And we have to decide as human beings who we are and what we stand for. Because if you don't stand for anything, you'll kneel for anyone. And that is why we have to be worthy and we have to have these conversations and these thoughts and these deep philosophical meditations, and we have to think about them. Write it in a diary, don't. Think about it, don't. I don't care where you get the idea, what leads you to these conversations. Whether it's something I said, Ring said, Scummer said, whether it's the film itself, whether it's a Disney movie, whether it's a song, whether it's... It doesn't matter what put you in the mindset to have these thoughts and to think about these things. Make sure you've made your decision before someone puts a gun to your head and makes it for you.
And with that, I think we'll move to shelling, because that was.
Could I say
that was the final.
Before we move to shilling, can I just say, Noodle, that speech you just made was amazing, and it should be recognised.
I get a bit on my. That was me on my soapbox, but yeah.
I get that was you on your soapbox, but I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said there.
Yeah, which is why that is going to be the final words on the topic.
Yes. Who goes first at shilling?
Yeah.
I don't have anything to shill, so...
Okay, so, Scummer?
Okay, well, I have my YouTube channel, God the Scummer. Please go and check that out. And I will just say, both myself and Ring, in the past 48 hours or so, have done a little response to somebody who needs to be called out, and I want to say, hey, achievement unlocked. I got the attention of one of the biggest hate preachers in the United States over the last week or so. Yes, please go and check out both myself and Ring's responses to Matt Powell, aka Cupcake. Yeah, go and check that stuff out, because and I would be remiss if I did not say that Matt Powell has a giant inflatable banana in his backyard that he calls Dr. Peel.
Yeah. So, yeah, I did a video or a streamed response to Matt Powell. And of course, next week is a topic that will be announced.
To be confirmed. Yeah,
to be confirmed, but I'm thinking it is, since it's literally the day before Valentine's Day, who knows?
Let's do a rom-com.
Yeah.
I'll make you to sit through a rom-com.
Also,
no rom-coms.
Well, I think we need something light and fluffy after this.
Yeah. Something that's not going to get me up on my soapbox preaching for 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Actually, I will say, Ring, good call. A palate cleanser after this one may be in order.
Yeah.
Again, it's important we have these conversations. It's also important we look after ourselves and we make sure we've got the spoons to fight the battle and not just talk about it. So yes, a palate cleanser, I think, well deserved at this point.
Yeah. And with that, taglines.
Take care, be good, and if you can't be good, remember, be careful.
I don't have a tagline, as you know. I will say, I have been on many of the media musing streams, to the point where I am now a regular co-host for you guys. I honestly feel, I'm not just as tag. I want to honestly say, of all the things we've covered, I almost feel like this is the most important conversation we've had doing this. I'm really very glad that I believe Noodle suggested this film that I hadn't even watched until earlier today. I'm really glad we covered this, but this was an important conversation to have, and I'll just sign off by saying Matt Powell has a giant inflatable banana in his backyard that he calls Dr. Peel.
Has he had a promotion? Is he a doctor now?
Yeah.
I
He's
thought he
always
was
been a
only
doctor. He's always been a
Now,
doctor.
now, first off, abolish the monarchy. Second off, the purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you questions to think on. Too often, we forget that.
Then films like this come along and remind us.
Yep.